The fishing tournament entries are due today at 10. I have gotten, I believe, most of them, and I know not everyone is here, but if folks here could just remind their constituents, their counterparts to, you can send them to me by email or you can text them to me. I will put the number out at the registration table so that everyone can get them to me. But yes, if everyone could just remember to send those pictures to me, and we'll put together a nice presentation. Sounds like some folks have been very successful, so looking forward to a good award ceremony today at lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was joking. I heard rumors about bluefin tuna out there. So if anyone sends a from shore picture of bluefin, I'm really interested. Yes, do not send a picture of a humpback with a hook in it, please. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to call XCOM to order here. And we'll look for approval of the agenda by consent. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the end of the agenda, can we add consideration of approval of the support letter for the RISE Act? Yeah, is that, yeah, and yeah, you should have gotten an email from me yesterday with a draft letter and 2 additional background documents sort of illustrating the flow of funds under the RISE Act should it be approved. So if you don't have that email, let me know. I can resend it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and so approval of the agenda with that addition, and I'll consider that consent. Thank you all. And also, go ahead, Dennis.
I'd like to add an agenda item at the end, briefly.
All right, I'll pick you up on other business. Thank you. And then approval of the meeting summary from the August 2022 meeting. Okay, good, very good. We will open up for public comment if there is any. That's why we feed people. Keep them quiet and happy. No, I'm just kidding, sorry. All right, so my agenda item is next, which is review and consideration of approval of the 2022 audit. In my role as vice chair, we did receive a clean opinion, and as Laura pointed out in her email to all of us, the financial position is very strong. Laura is obviously here and willing to go through that audit and just everything that happened there if anyone is interested. But we feel that, you know, since that email was sent out and that things were so clean and clear cut, that we'll avoid that, or you know, we'll hold off on just going through the line by line unless anyone feels that that's necessary. And if not, I will make a motion on behalf of the AOC to approve the 2022 audit as is. Okay, good, very good. And that comes up in business, or
No, it's not. It's the only place.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very good.
Awesome.
Next, I'll turn it over to Bob to talk about the CARES Act update.
Yeah, please. Great. Thank you, Joe. So CARES Act, we talked about it a whole lot. We're getting pretty close. We spent $200 and some million, not spent it, distributed it is the right term. We didn't spend it on vacations or anything. Pretty good time if we did. So the question is, now that we're getting down to the small dollar amounts at the very end of the process, what do you want to do with it? Some states have indicated they can't or will not, need all the money that they've received, and they don't, if they give out any additional money, it'll make folks more than whole. We can't do that. So the question is, and a number of states have also indicated they do have continuing needs and could distribute more funds to the folks that have applied for it. So the question is, how much money is left over, and what do you guys want to do with it? There's a spreadsheet up on the screen that shows kind of where we are, and this That's CARES 1, Laura?
Yeah.
That's on the screen?
I've got two spreadsheets.
Okay. So CARES 1 is on the screen. It's pretty, there's a $700,000 or so left over.
No. Sorry. Excuse me. There is not. If you look to the very far right column, there's $55,000 projected to be left over. The $693,000 is what we are at right now, but Maine, that is mostly Maine's money. They still have whatever is left, 638. So there's about a $55,000 difference there. I anticipate you'll spend all of your money. Yeah. Sorry.
And we don't intend to reallocate the 55,000 among the states, right? The idea there potentially is the commission might ask for that as additional overhead, since we probably spent more than we took on CARES 1 for sure. So that one's pretty straightforward. I don't think we need any action by the executive committee on that, unless there's questions on the detail of CARES 1. But it seems that 55,000 out of 118 million is we did pretty well. So Lisa, can you go to the next one? on potentially using that 55 as, I guess, if there's no objection from the executive committee, we can, we would go ahead and ask for that the remaining funds as additional administrative fees overhead, if that's okay with everyone. All right, don't see any objections. So going on to CARES 2. We have, there's about 19 million left over that hasn't been spent yet. Some of it is dedicated, right, Laura?
All of it's dedicated still.
Yeah,
None of it has been returned.
None of it's returned, okay. So that, you can see where the difference column is, what remains unspent. Some of those amounts states have indicated they probably will not use, and some of them they will. I think, Joe, New Jersey is one of the bigger states that has money that they will not use, won't need all of it. So the question, I guess, around the table is what, Delaware, I think, is in the same spot. They're not going to need all their funds. Okay.
Still haven't gotten it.
So it may be worthwhile to go, Mr. Chairman, sort of north-south and see where people stand on this money, and we can sort of tally up from there and see how much money is left over and it's two parts. Do you need your money? Yes, no. And if there's additional money available, could you use that to distribute to your industry folks?
Well, I'm going to start because we probably have the most money on the table still. We are not going to do any more direct payments. So I will talk to our federal partners on some of the smaller programs that we have done. We've done some advertising work, which is hasn't hit the public yet, but the company that we're working with is really doing some great stuff, and I just want to see if we can get them a little more to extend that a little longer. But we will have a considerable amount that we're turning back over, and Laura, I'll get you the number soon. So if other folks can that are in a similar situation can just give us an update, that'd be great. Thank you. If you want to go, Lynn, are you ready? We'll just start at your end and come around.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I was just sort of sitting here thinking about it. So Maryland has about 950,000 according to the spreadsheet. I think initially we had thought we would do some projects with that money, but at this point, I'm not so sure we'll use it. I will say for the record that I was really excited about using that money to start use it as seed money to start a revolving loan program to help watermen upgrade their gear, help young watermen get into the fishery, really provide some easy access to big capital expenses to get people going in these fisheries and help them. Some of them sold stuff during COVID, but we couldn't do that because A, it's a loan, and B, we would have had to screen the loan applicants for a 35% or greater than 35% loss. So I just, for the record, that's a long-winded way of saying I'm a little disappointed. I think there's some really good stuff we could do with that amount of money, but we can't. So I don't know. We're still deliberating, but I have a feeling we're gonna let it go.
Yeah, though I'm amazed our fiscal still hasn't sent Laura the bill for what we did distribute, but we only distributed about 4.5% of what we got. The rest of it is there. We polled our people in the eligible categories if 2021 losses were greater than 35%. If we had enough of them, whether it would be worth doing another application period, but we got no response. Maybe one person that said that they would be eligible, and so it just wasn't worth it. So as far as I'm concerned, what we have left in Delaware is about $2.8 million after what we paid out. So that's available to other states.
Yeah, because of the approach we're taking on spending down our money, reimbursing license fees over the course of the year, and some of the other projects that have been a bit delayed, and some back and forth with NIMS. You know, I think we're still on target to spend that all. So I don't think, you know, we might have a few bucks left over when we're done, but not much.
Thank you. We were able to distribute everything out to our individual industry members. Now we're working on programs and kind of going back and forth with Noah at this point in time to get things moving forward with funding the programs. I have no doubt we will be able to expend all of what we have left, which is a little shy of 800,000, and we could even use some more for some of these programs for kind of like what Lynn described for our younger generation trying to move up into fisheries from having a setback during COVID and such. Thanks.
Yeah, so we've still got just shy of 1.2 sitting on the table, but we've given out everything we can give out in accordance with our approved spend plan. And you know, we've given some consideration to things like Lynn was mentioning, but unless the rules were changed, we're kind of stuck. That's it. So that's all we could legally give out. So I just as soon see someone else use it if we can allow other states to use it.
Thanks. I'd have to talk to Laura a little bit more to understand what that 61,000 is. It's either that, and the remainder for Rhode Island, it's either, you know, we might already have plans for it, or it might be tied up with our tax process. I'm not sure which it is, but I'm fairly certain it's spent. Yep. So getting there, Joe. It's okay. And you know, if we would have our hand out if there is, you know, money to go back out. We were fortunate enough to build in a seafood marketing element into our spend plan, and so we would definitely put some towards that. And there may be an opportunity. I'm fairly certain our processes are still like way below what their actual damages were. So you know, I can't give you a number yet, but definitely interested in receiving some more if there's more available.
As same as CARES 1, we limited the distribution of 40% for each one of the applicants. So And I think the 20,000 here is just for, we left a few bucks back for appeals. So we're going to go through it all very clearly. And since we were only at 40%, we definitely could spend a lot more. And in fact, we would just, the process we used for the extra money at CARES 1 was just use the same recipients and just increase percentage, whatever. So pretty simple process. So yeah, we'll be looking for more money and probably could spend it pretty quick. Thanks.
Yeah. Jim was pointing out that I must be the winner because I have a 0 next to our state. I don't know. It's kind of like with parentheses around a 0. I'll have to ask the stock assessment file just what that means. That's like a double negative or double null. Yeah, we spent out all our money. We had our requests were almost double what we got. So yeah, if we can use the same application process, if the folks meet the 35%, and if they're interested in it, we'd be interested in getting some more funding to support that.
Massachusetts, we gave the money out pretty effectively. Whether we would be interested in reopening that, I guess, would be a function of how much was available. So I really can't say.
Clearly, we saved $1 for our rainy day fund, but we spent most of our money, and we absolutely would want some more money as well, or could absolutely give out some more money. One of the things that Dee noted when we talked about this, we didn't really want to reopen the application process, but would rather amend our plan as we currently have it. That would make it easier if it does come that we can give some more money. So, thank you.
So in Connecticut, we've essentially spent all our CARES 2 money. We have a small residual balance there, but that is related to the aquaculture portion of our spend plan. They were doing a oyster bed rehabilitation project, and I think they had some difficulties spending the money. So last I knew, they were working on revising the spend plan with NOAA, but essentially we spent all our round 2 money. We did have substantial residual losses that weren't covered from round 2 applicants. So if there was money available, we'd be interested in more of those. Kathy mentioned, that might be contingent on whether or not we have to go back through another spend plan creation process with NOAA or not, or if we can just use our existing spend plan.
Thanks, Justin. We'll go to Doug, and then Erica is online, so she'll be able to speak for Florida after Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know what the difference between a negative and a double naught is, but we're done with COVID and we're done with CARES. We're still working on some disaster money right now, so I don't think our folks need more money at the moment.
And Erica?
Thank you, Joe. If there is funds reallocated for it, were y'all able to?
You're breaking up a little bit. If we think what we heard was that Florida could redistribute money if it's available.
Yes.
Great, got it. Thank you. So obviously, we don't have exact numbers here yet, and that's a conversation that still needs to happen. So I don't know, Bob. We're still continuing to do XCOM meetings as necessary. So I think this will be an agenda item that will be. Oh, go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Joe. One of the things that I do want to point out is that in CARES, we have $577,000 still in outstanding checks. And in CAA, we have $203,000 in outstanding checks. So that's another issue.
Yeah.
Sorry, but it's live.
Yeah. So just, quick tally going around as people were talking, it's, there's about 5 million or so that sounds like it will be likely given back or available for redistribution. And I have 7 states that said they might be able to take it. If we include Massachusetts, that said sort of depends on how much there is, if it's worth it or not. So, Laura and I can do some spreadsheet work and put some hypothetical redistribution scenarios together and share those and do another, one of our webinar executive committee calls in a couple of weeks. yeah, we can go through those details a little bit closer, but it looks like about 5 million based on the quick conversation we just had.
Thanks, Bob. Tony, you ready? So we'll take on the draft de minimis policy. I'll be remiss if I don't say that Spud would love to see us move the ball on this one. We're gonna be talking CE later, and maybe we're not quite as far along yet. But the last time we've seen this, I think we were all feeling pretty comfortable. So Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the supplemental materials was the draft de minimis policy. I'll just run through it. It's just a 2-page document. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but it was developed based on the guidance that the executive committee and the policy board gave me at our August meeting. So the document just starts off with the definition of de minimis as is in the ISFMP charter, and that de minimis is a requirement to be included in different provisions of each of our fishery management plans. The designation of de minimis is to reduce the burden, the management burden for states whose measures would have a negligible impact on the conservation of the species. And the policy outlines some basic standards for de minimis. It does not require the board to follow these. They can deviate from these if there is justification, and they can put that justification in the management document that makes a change to their de minimis policy. This de minimis policy does not automatically change a FMP's provisions. An addendum or an amendment process would need to be completed in order to change the provisions of each of our FMP's de minimis sections as they stand now, unless the FMP has a different process. Not that I am aware of one having a different process at this time. So there would be a set of minimum standards that each plan would put forward. This is to And these minimum standards would not have to change annually when the FMP changes its measures. These minimum standards would need to provide a minimum level of conservation as well as prevent regulatory loopholes. The measures can either be the same for both the commercial and recreational fishery, or they can be different. And the document makes a recommendation that boards should review those minimum standards after benchmark stock assessments to confer that they still provide that minimum conservation level for the plan. The de minimis designation can be considered separately for the commercial and recreational fisheries or combined. But you have to have a designation for each sector. The only exception is when there is no significant fishery for a sector for that species. For example, we've talked about, I think in this at these board levels, that Menhaden doesn't have a real recreational fishery that's being managed right now. So you would need a de minimis designation for recreational Menhaden in the FMP. And then for the thresholds, it's a recommendation that a plan uses the average landings from the last 3 years, and that if those landings are less than 1% of the coastwide total landings, then you would meet that de minimis requirement. And then the last part of the policy is the sampling requirements. And it suggests that de minimis states are exempt from the sampling requirements because it can be very difficult to meet those requirements when you have very minimal landings. But we do recognize the importance of sampling for stock assessments, and sometimes these outer edge states are quite important for that. And so it just recommends that the stock assessment committee takes a look at the sampling requirements and recommendations prior to see if there is any minimum small amount of sampling that may or may not need to be collected for those de minimis states or not. And I think that's the document as it stands right now.
Thanks, Tony. I think the working group did a great job, as I've mentioned, on this. And for obvious reasons, we're going to have specific items for specific species. I think we'll be able to move the ball forward on some sort of standardization. But I actually did have one question from my staff on we're working with landings, and is it going to be species specific on, are those landings evaluated in pounds or numbers? Because, we, at a species like bluefish, we have such a disparity in trying to figure out the average weights for those fish. And I know early on in the cobia FMP days, we talked about the importance of keeping cobia in numbers of fish. Is this something, does the policy speak to this, or will this maybe be at the recommendations of the PDTs and stuff, or PRTs and stuff?
The policy doesn't speak to it. I think we could put a section in here to it if it is what the executive committee is desiring. It could be up to, I guess, the plan review team to make a suggestion for each individual species, or the technical committee. I think maybe in this case it might be better to have the technical committee be that. But we did not think about that when we were writing the policy.
Questions or comments? Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Joe. I don't know if it's worth putting into a policy, but I was just wondering, it only applies on a few species, I think, but from a regulatory standpoint, if a state goes out of de minimis and then has regulatory requirement, I'm thinking, since we're de minimis in so many things, and spot would be an example of this, where we have to put a regulation into place, but then we went back into de minimis. I don't think, we wouldn't change the regulation, but I'm just curious as to what if the policy might cover a situation like that, just make a mention of the regulatory requirements stay in place or whatever, because based on the de minimis rules, there could be situations where states do go in and out of de minimis.
Yeah, Tony, thoughts, or has that come up at all?
So, the policy has been developed to do the average of 3 years. We're hoping that keeps states from jumping in and out of de minimis. There are some plans that have a higher than 1% requirement. And, as I said, this policy doesn't prevent a species board from doing something different, that they just need to justify why they're doing something different. So I think that for these species where you see, you can look at the data and see if you might have a lot of jumping back and forth, and to recognize that we still don't, if the technical committee doesn't feel that higher level of landings and the standard minimum measures that have been put in place aren't going to be negative for the stock, then they could do something different that keeps them from jumping in and out of a de minimis state, I guess you might call it.
Yeah, that's what I figured as much, but I'm just curious because I saw, I think it was yesterday with Spanish mackerel, I think Maryland had exceeded. We're in the same situation now. This is, it's going to be like, I think 2 years in a row where our 3-year average will exceed the de minimis standard. And I'm guessing we'll ask, it's going to be board discretion, of course, but I was just curious if it was worth putting into a policy, just a general guideline about regulations. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree, John. Go ahead, Roy.
With regard to the minimum measures that would be specified in each plan, do we go back and examine existing plans that don't have minimum measures specified in the plans and subsequently add them? Or do we only put these minimum measures in as we come up on an amendment or a benchmark assessment?
I think it's up to the species board. You could wait until you have another document that's coming up. Or if this is something that's super important to that board and there are several states that want to have some minimum standards, then you go ahead and do an addendum.
I love that noise. I have no idea what it is, but I absolutely love it. Yeah, and Tony, I think that's consistent with conversations we've had around the table before. Anyone else? All right, so I guess. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so far down the way. Just a shout out to Tony. Thank you for finally we get this to where I think we're all in agreement, and I appreciate the work. I know that we talk about the work group. We had one phone call. Tony's done the rest of this, so thank you very much for it, Tony.
Is there a resolution on pounds versus numbers? Is that something you want in the document or not? If you do, we can add it, but we'll come back to you.
No, I mean, if this is, unless others feel differently, I would like to see this move forward to policy board. And I do think, given species like cobia and stuff like that, that if as you mentioned, if a technical committee or this moves through a TC/plan review on a recommendation that numbers make more sense, then I think, at board discretion, we can deal with that. So unless there's an objection by a show of by hands, we can move this to policy board. Good. I'll text Spud. Okay, so Bob, you're up next. We'll look at the spending strategy for the right whale lobster funding.
Great, thank you, Joe. So we're spending more money. The $14 million, Lisa, if you could pull that up, that'd be wonderful. So there's a table that was in the supplemental materials, and it's going to be up on the screen, and we have some hard copies, so everyone should have access to it one way or another. That'd be great. If the northern states have talked about this, the 4 northernmost states have talked about this money a few times on a conference call. And however, the funds extend down through Maryland. And the question is, how do folks want to distribute this money? As a background, Congress provided $14 million for right whales, lobster interactions. And it can be generally used in 3 categories. One is gear marking, gear modifications to bring the gear up to be consistent with the take reduction plan as it stands right now. The second category is trackers, the vessel trackers that are going to be required, and the cellular subscriptions that go along with those trackers. And then third category is just general lobster and whale research. So the $14 million can be divided, among the states to handle any of those different categories. The one provision that Congress had in there was that any state with more than 20 federal permits gets a minimum of 4% of the funding. So this table that's on the screen, you can see there's 3 states, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and New Jersey, that each get 4% because they have over 20% of the, over 20 permits, but if you just did the standard at proportional allocations, they would have received less than 4%. Or Rhode Island was right at 4% either way. So those states, get the minimum there, and then the other states, smaller ones, Connecticut, New York, Delaware, Maryland, they have less than 20 permit holders, and Delaware and Maryland are combined here because one of those states has less than 3 and it's confidential and gets kind of funky. So the question, and there's 2 different columns here, or the 2 columns on the right-hand side are different strategies that the 4 northern states have talked about as far as allocating this money. One is to take 10 million off the top and allocate it based on that column there, and that would go straight toward gear modifications and gear markings. But then the northern states talked a little more. They said, why don't we just distribute the whole 14 million based on that same formula, and the states then could pay for gear marking and the trackers and theoretically have some money left over for research within their state. So the thinking of the northern states right now, and I don't want to overstate this, is I think they're comfortable with the right-hand column and distributing the money, based on those allocations for the full 14 million. So there's 2 questions, Mr. Chairman, for the group. I think is everyone comfortable with distributing the money based on the far right-hand column, and then how do the smaller states want to handle moving their money? I don't, Connecticut, I don't know if it's worth $23,000 to set up a contract with us, and maybe ASMSC keeps that money, and we purchase the trackers and give them to your boats or something along those lines. And if you have gear marking requirements or reimbursements, and you settle on an amount, we could send checks to those 3 people, maybe, and hypothetically for the other small states as well. So New Jersey in this one, the way the numbers worked out, actually gets a pretty big share of money, but it doesn't have a huge number of permit holders. It makes sense. And New Jersey, the way the congressional language reads is does receive 4%, and that's that's how Congress. They just didn't want anyone with a relatively substantial lobster fishery to miss out and not have enough money to cover all their gear modifications and trackers. So those are the questions. Is everybody okay with the right-hand column, and how do the smaller states want to handle moving their money around? Is the 2 questions for the group. And I can answer any more questions if folks have them.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm good with the right-hand column, and I'm good with you getting the money out the door. So, although I think Pat said he was bored, so he'd help out too if he, could spare time.
Yeah, I agree with Jim.
I made this comment up front. So the trackers have potentially some sort of care and feeding that's going to be needed, technical advice and help to get them on the boats and that sort of thing. And a couple of the states in the northern region have indicated they're going to hire staffers that might be able to help out with sort of technical support for the smaller states down south. Rhode Island and Maine, I think, indicated they might be able to help out. Maine's got a pretty big squad of permits. But Pat, he doesn't seem to be excited about that. But okay, Mass and Rhode Island. That's what I meant, Pat. Mass and Rhode Island might be able to do it. So, we can work on that and help out. And Tony can give you guys an update, or she did earlier this week, if you're at the lobster board, on where the trackers stand. They get pretty close to selecting or identifying what trackers meet the minimum criteria and are available for the industry to use. So, we understand that the southern states is, there is an administrative burden associated with the trackers, and we can help out as best we can.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I don't want it to seem like we are not willing to help. I think it depends on the scope. Obviously the size of our fishery is a little bit different. But if we can, if there's a small amount of work that needs to be done and we need some assistance, then Maine will be happy to try to chime in. If we identify something more, I think I would have tweaked our budget a little bit based on that. So.
Delaware, Maryland, you guys okay? Yeah, and for us, you know, oh, Jay, sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, you can go first, Joe, and then, but if you can come back to me, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the criteria to qualify was quite liberal, so that the 26 even for us, I think, you know, we will do our best to help make sure that all 26 know about this, but I don't know that 26 are actually even going to be interested for us. So go ahead, Jay.
Thanks. And just back to the kind of helping issue, it might be good to kind of scope out, you know, so Rhode Island could take like Connecticut and Delaware, Maryland, and Mass could take New York, or, you know, however, to divvy it up so we know who to let those people know who to contact. So we should probably sort that out. And sorry if I missed this, Bob, you may have said this, but is there a sense of like when, you know, we might be able to start operationalizing some of this stuff? And I was just thinking about the comment that David Borden made during the lobster board meeting. So wondering if there's more clarity on that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jason. ASMSC has already completed most of the paperwork. We have to, the individual states need to submit their spend plans to NOAA for review. And the good news here is that individual plans can be approved and those states can start moving money around. It's kind of like the CARES Act rather than the sea herring disaster. Sea herring, all state plans had to be in, all reviewed sort of as one block. This one, you know, if we agree that the, you know, Rhode Island gets the 550,000, for some reason you get $1 less, Jason, than the other 4% states. So I'll make you whole somehow. I'll give you $1.
Kathy's got that money.
Yeah, I'm gonna use Kathy's dollar. So, you know, we can, as soon as we agree on the amounts and the states put together their plans, we can get them into NOAA. And I think, you know, Derek's in the back of the room. They'll go into his inbox and I think he can probably turn them around relatively quickly. So I don't want to speak for him though, but so we can move it. And I think, you know, based on the way the conversation is going, I can work with the southern states and we develop probably one spend plan that lumps all of them together and have that money move through ASMSC. So it's really, I think it would be ultimately 5 spend plans, the 4 northern states plus the sort of block of the southern smaller states.
Go ahead, Dan.
So Bob, as a follow-up to that non-answer, Massachusetts is going to rulemaking to require our trackers by May 1. Is that safe? In other words, do you think, and we've got some shows coming up this winter. The Mass Lobstermen's meeting is in April. The Maine Fishermen's Forum is in March. So I think there's going to be a lot of buzz about that. So it would be really great if we could have, like, I plan to hire somebody on a 2-year contract to do this, not only getting the machines out, but handling some of the data. So I just want to make sure I'm safe to proceed with a May 1st requirement.
Yeah. Derek, can we put you on the spot and ask a timing question for you? Can you come up to the microphone so we can hear you? So, you know, how long do you think the review would take in your shop once a state pulls together their spend plan for their portion of this money?
Yeah, obviously no promises or guarantees, but we're going to try and move them within about a week or 2. Depends how many come in at one individual time. So we already have a number of folks that are lined up ready to review, and we'll get them out quick.
So Bob, I think you probably think I'm safe to go with the May 1st requirement.
Absolutely. Well, you have to put your spend plan together. So ball's in your court now.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Pat.
Isn't there going to be an OMB review?
Not for these funds, only the disaster funds. The herring disaster is at OMB now. So this money does not have to go through an OMB review, just the review that Derek was talking about.
Okay. All right, that's good to know. And I think, and because it's all state by state spend plans and not a single spend plan, right? I think for Massachusetts, I mean, we're happy to kind of hold back, let theirs get into the queue first for review. We're not on the same deadline that Dan is, so I think if the other states are willing to go in that direction, I think that way we can help give some comfort to Mass.
Good. I think we're, yeah, I think we're good there. All right, Tony, you're back up. We'll look at the, where we are with the CE.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the work group, there's a subset of Management and Science Committee members that have been working on the questions that the Executive Committee came up with on conservation equivalency. And these questions would help guide how we make changes to the conservation equivalency guidance document. I think that we've heard from the executive committee that we want to make the guidance document have some requirements in it. So there's that part of it that staff can go ahead and make changes to. But then there are these series of questions that you have asked us, and we had the subset look at them. Then they've gone back to the full Management and Science Committee for their review, or are going back to them at this time. And I can provide a general summary of where we are on these questions for the group. And then if there's questions, I've asked Jeff to help me answer them, because I'm not sure I'll be able to answer all the questions that come along with these. So the first question that the committee had asked is there a better way to characterize and address uncertainty in conservation equivalency proposals? I'm going to be pretty brief here, so there are more details to this, but there's a primary concern that when highly uncertain data are used, that a conservation equivalency proposal will not be conservative enough. And so to ensure that proposals have a high probability of achieving a management target, the technical committee for that species should establish a set of minimum standards for the types and quality of the data that can be used in the proposals that are being put forward on the table for that species. It's difficult to come up with a series of standards that would go across the board. And so we want to make sure that there is that flexibility for the individual TCs for the specific set of proposals that are coming forward to make those requirements. In many cases, the uncertainty of the data set is unknown, such as with voluntary reported data. For these sources, TCs should decide to not allow their use or require the states to provide some evidence with written justification that the uncertainty falls within an acceptable range for these types of data. And then if state proposals do not meet all the criteria established by the TC, then it may result in the proposal being denied. Alternatively, the TC can impose additional alternative criteria, such as requiring a penalty or a buffer on a target. And these additional criteria should be established relative to the state's proposal and not applied as a one-size-fits-all solution. So there is some differences that go in. The second question was to develop a buffer to account for uncertainty. Should stock status be accounted for when establishing buffers? And the work group agreed that stock status should determine whether CE is allowable, and just that should be straight up. And then whether or not the buffer should be overly burdensome on fringe states or not. Should the buffer apply differently to a fringe state? And I'll first point out that there is no definition of a fringe state, so that would we need to get some guidance on what does the commission feel that a fringe state is. And then if a buffer should apply differently or perhaps not used at all with states that have very small harvest CE should be reevaluated to see if it was actually effective, just like in any other state for fringe states. A change is needed to avoid sort of that choose your own adventure status for individual states. So it's either a coastwide measure or everyone does CE. Every state should take the same reduction, and a blanket fringe state rule shouldn't pertain to conservation equivalency buffers. The third question was develop a hindsight analysis to see how well the conservation equivalency was performed, including the coastwide measure for comparison. And would this be used to inform the above buffer? And then also thinking about how we consider harvest versus total removals that's consistent with an FMP. So without accountability, it's difficult for cooperative management to be successful. With respect to CE, it's really important to evaluate the effectiveness of each proposal after the fact to determine if the target was actually achieved or not. And if equivalency was not achieved, then what are the appropriate repercussions that need to be established through the plan? We noted it before, but it's important to say it again, that fisheries data are confounded by uncertainty, which makes evaluating performance very difficult, and there is not a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. You have a lot of different factors that can affect catch. And so because of that, boards and TCs should still strongly consider developing a method for evaluation when you put forward the allowance of CE for some set of measures. And there's a list of criteria that we've provided to consider when establishing the CE guidelines and trying to come up with some sort of evaluation process. And then just lastly, that the board should also establish appropriate actions for any state that does not achieve the target. What those may be is up to each individual species board, but to just put that out there. The fourth question is some measures are non-quantifiable for species and measures that are harder to evaluate. Should CE be allowed? Should there be bounds on CE, or is anything allowed unless specifically excluded from the FMP? And the group just recommends that a state submitting a proposed measure for credit must be able to demonstrate the satisfaction of the TC, a measurable reduction in harvest. Any measure that meets a criteria and not specifically excluded in the FMP should be allowed for consideration of CE. But can be rejected upon review of their proposal, obviously. And measures that are non-quantifiable can be encouraged and considered as a buffer, but not to be used as direct credit for a reduction in harvest. So non-quantifiable measures in their minds include things like circle hooks, non-targeting zones, no gaffing, outreach for best practices, and other measures that are expected to reduce release mortality or overall discards. Then should the FMP allow the mix of coastwide measures and CE measures within the same management process? The group had a lot to say about this, but when it came down to it in the end, there was consensus that if there's a target reduction that is needed, it cannot be achieved through a combination of a coastwide measure that is optional, and then with some states opting to use an alternative measure. So sort of either everybody uses the coastwide measure or everybody uses their choose your own adventure or CE path. And then should measures that cannot be quantified be permitted under CE? And we got at that a little bit before, but the group's consensus is that no, they should not be permitted under CE if their sole purpose is for credit in a reduction. As I said before, buffers, those can still be encouraged. Are there minimum data standards for CE? And the group came, that any proposal must demonstrate a quantifiable reduction in harvest to be considered for CE. The work group expressed concerns regarding the use of different citizen science information if it doesn't have a strong quantifiable number that can be put into the proposal, and that a program that has been ongoing for a number of years with consistent sampling may be able to be more informative for such evaluation. And then we did talk about a goal of a 20% PSE that was established by the ACCSP Rec Technical Committee for sampling recreational species. NOAA has advice that anything over a 50% PSE should not be considered. The striped bass board put together a 40% bound. So, it may be that some flexibility is appropriate when a stock is not overfished and overfishing is not occurring, but that when there states that are not meeting minimum data standards should consider a regional approach or something else in order to pool their data to lower that PSE. But the group didn't provide a specific percentage that the board needs to go to. And then there was the question of, is there a required level of review of the data sets used if not within the bounds of the minimum data standards? And that a set of most appropriate models and levels of review for data sets should be identified prior to the TC review. And this provides guidance for the TC, and it leads to a more open and robust discussion from the technical committees. So yes, one should be created, but as I said before, those minimum data standards can be unique to either the proposal or the measure that the board is considering allowing CE for, or specific to the species. And then should there be time limit on CE proposals? And I think that what the group said is that each proposal should specify how long it's going to be, and then a review period behind that for those proposals, and that it can keep going as long as those reviews keep happening over a time period. But it does need to state how long the state intends to have those measures in place. And if the state wants to extend that time frame, if that is the will of the board, then they can continue to do that. Should stock status impact conservation equivalency, and if so, how? For an example, if a stock is declared overfished and overfishing is occurring, then should conservation equivalency be reevaluated? CE should be reevaluated after any benchmark stock assessment, and if the stock is declared overfished, then the group recommends that CE not be allowed. And conservation equivalency could not be reinstated until the stock was returned to not overfished. The work group considered different categories of overfishing. If overfishing only occurred in the terminal year or was slightly above the threshold of the 2 recent years, then the use of CE should not be limited. And that was, I think, the general gist there. So I can take any questions. I guess the question from staff is, do you want us to attempt to take the responses to these questions and work them into the policy? Are there aspects of these questions that are, I don't know, that's my first question, is do you want us to work them into the policy?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's a lot, and at some point this is going to have to get by Megan and Nicola and Shannon, because we've learned from other policies that no matter what we think, they're gonna take it to a higher level. But you know, several of us around the table we're part of trying to put this together, and you know, I guess the question is, what are the next steps? Because it was tough answering those questions. Yeah, Dennis. So Dennis, go ahead with your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I served on this subcommittee. I'm not sure how I got there, but I was there sort of as the generalist. We got into a lot of different things, as Tony just explained. And I must thank Tony for refereeing this whole project, because there were a lot of ideas brought forward, a lot of information to digest. And I think we placed not an undue burden, maybe an undue burden on Tony, but we've oftentimes left a lot of things in her hands. And I'd like to thank Jay and Joe, and I think Jeff Brust and Kevin Sullivan from New Hampshire. I don't know if I'm missing anyone, but we spent quite a few meetings this summer. And I think the takeaway from this all is that it's clear that something has to be done with conservation equivalency. And I think we had, I won't call it trouble, but reaching definite conclusions about what to do. We did have a number of different ideas, and as Tony said, one size doesn't fit all, but it's clear that there's a need for sideboards and bounds and demonstrations of effectiveness, and again, clear that something needs to be done. I'm not sure if we don't need another set of eyes to look at the things that we've done up to this point, but this whole exercise is something that we should not let fall by the wayside, and we should eventually come up with a finished product so that the public views our application of conservation equivalency with, you know, a better feeling about how we handle it. So I'll leave it at that, and maybe some other members that participated might have some comments.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. I'd like to go to Tony first.
I just wanted to let the board know that Management and Science Committee in full has not reviewed the responses to the question. And I think we did say we would do that. And I would be remiss to not say that Pat Capefield has not been essential in helping us move this along as well. So thank you to Pat, because yeah, no.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I share a lot of Dennis's thoughts here. A lot of really good work has gone into this. I think we will miss an opportunity if we don't start to move it in the direction of developing a policy to create some sideboards, as Dennis, to use Dennis's terms. But I think we ought to get this off to management science for review, and then have that come back to the policy board, and then make a determination then of exactly what we want to do to go forward.
All right, I don't see hands, but I'd like some other thoughts on this as well. And just go ahead. Oh, good. Okay, Erica, go ahead.
Thank you, Joe. And if you can't hear me, I think maybe Mel or Doug might be able to share some of my concerns. There's a lot to unpack here. My goodness, there was a lot of work put into this, and it was admittedly a little difficult to follow without having a document that summarized what Tony went over, but I can tell that there's been a lot of thought put in this. I heard a request for guidance on next steps, and it is a little bit difficult for me to provide my perspective without, you know, seeing a document, seeing where we're at. I heard a few things that seem to be running counter to what other management bodies are working on, like the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. And so if we could bring in people from the southern states to talk about this, I think it would be really vital, because I think we will run into issues as state managers working with different sets of rules at the state and federal level. And so if we could broaden the group that provides input, I would appreciate that and I would volunteer.
I think, you know, before this really goes anywhere, we need to get this out of the form of thoughts from a working group to answers to tough questions into more of a bulleted ideas for policy. And Mel has his hand up, so we'll go to him.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things mentioned the council, I mean, we have a program for citizen science. It's very structured and it's very focused on using citizen science potentially, eventually for management purposes to feed into. So that's one of the things I think that there may be some comments in there about concerns about use of that sort of, those sort of data or something, but that's where that'd be one thing to kind of focus on. If done properly and done in accordance with very strict standards and all, could be potentially very useful.
And I think that that's what the committee was trying to get at, the programs that are established with, you know, sampling guidelines, et cetera, could be permitted, but not just any old set of data can go into a proposal.
Others? Well, I think, Tony, we have a next step, and I'm assuming that I don't know if it's a task for them, but to, again, get it out of the question and answer phase into more of a bulleted, these are the types of things that may go into a policy and then back to us.
So you're asking for the Management Science Committee to review the responses to the questions and then try to turn them into a bulleted list of things for you all to consider to put into a policy. I hear you. Just making sure.
Okay, if we're good with that, we'll move on. I'm going to change the title of the next agenda item to Future Annual Meetings After New Jersey Just Crushed It. And I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Joe. So October 14th to 19th, 2023, we are going to be in Beaufort, North Carolina. Kathy, do you want to say anything about the meeting at this point?
I just hope the Lord helps us do as good as New Jersey has done. Thank you.
2024 will be in Maryland, Lynn. We've not even discussed it yet. Anything you want to say?
I just want to say we're very excited and we've been talking up some ideas among our delegation. So I'll probably be, one of us will get in touch and we're looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you. And then 2025 will be in Delaware. John?
Well, now I know when I should retire by.
A couple more years after that, 2026, we're going to be in Rhode Island. And then 2027, back to South Carolina. 2028, Massachusetts. 2029, Pennsylvania. And 2030, Georgia.
Okay, so Dennis, we're on to other business, and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To steal or butcher a phrase from John F. Kennedy, I'm here to ask not what the LGAs can do for the commission, but what the commission can do for the LGAs. What we'll try to do this morning is dip into the commission's little penny jar for a few dollars. At Monday's hearing meeting, I nominated Ray Kane of Massachusetts to participate in the New England Council's hearing meetings. This is in my mind, above and beyond the normal duties of a commissioner to send them out to do another thing. And I don't know in history, back in 1942, what the framers of the compact had in mind, but I don't think that they envisioned that the LGAs would be donating 20 to 30 days a year of time and effort. It's true that we do this as volunteers. Roy Miller and I sit at this table receiving no remuneration, while the rest of you sitting at the table are making what I would consider a handsome wage. Maybe in your minds not so handsome, but whatever. You know, we just spent a few minutes talking about dispersing hundreds of millions of dollars, $14 million of lobster money. But what I'm getting at is I think that an individual, just using Ray Kane's name, that has to now devote, maybe talking again to Richie White, who was the previous representative to the herring board at the New England Management Council, that he was spending about 4 meetings a year doing this, again, volunteering his time. I thought of this quite some time ago, but being that Richie and I are good friends, I didn't think it would be proper for me to be trying to put some money into Richie White's pocket. But however, my thought is that somehow the commission should develop a method to pay, call it a stipend or whatever you wish, to an individual that has to do more than what should normally be expected of a commissioner. I just think that, and again, I don't know, Mr. Reed is here, but talking to Eric Reed, he's seeing a similar situation at the council where I think their advisors are now being given additional duties, and they're considering or gone beyond considering paying them some amount of money for what they're doing, not as much as what a council member would receive. But what I'm really talking about, if you talk about dollars, is 4 meetings a year, maybe a stipend of, say, 50% of what a council member might get, and probably amounting to maybe in a total of $1,000. This is thereabouts a year, but some figure. And I think that would also apply to anyone else that's asked to go above and beyond, you know, the normal, what we would consider the normal duties of a commissioner. It's very clear that in recent years, and again, different, going back in history, pulling a Tom Foti here, that back in the 1990s when I started here, I didn't sit at the table. I didn't have any, I won't say I didn't have anything to do, but I surely wasn't doing what I'm expected to do now, such as sitting on the Conservation Equivalency Board, being a member of the Executive Committee, being a member of the AOC, so on and so forth. And I do that willingly, and I've been doing it for, it'll be starting my 27th year. So again, I asked the commission to see if we can't figure out a way to ensure, not ensure, but remunerate, that's not the right word, but to be simple, pay someone like Ray that's going to have to be going to council meetings. And Ray didn't put me up to do this. And I thank you for your consideration, and I ask that something be done. And at the very least, I will be bringing this up with Roy. I haven't told Roy, but at the next LGA meeting that we have in February, if it's necessary to muster more support there. But everyone that I've talked to this point seems to be favorable about doing this. It's just, I think, a matter of how, you know, we could figure out how to do that. And I thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Dennis. And yeah, as you mentioned, you had brought this up at Herring, and not everyone here is on that board. So some of the folks here are probably hearing this for the first time. And I don't know, Bob, if you had any comments at this time.
No, nothing specific. It'd be good to hear the from other members of the executive committee. I guess I'm probably getting way too far into the details and the parts of this that will make it complicated, such as, what meetings are above and beyond. Is it, conservation equivalency work or that sort of thing? Or is it, do the joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council where the full board goes, does that count as, above and beyond? There's a lot of things. And then the other thing that complicates this potentially is the notion of proxies. And if, different proxies are for different people, or if multiple proxies show up for a meeting, because that happens sometimes here, how would that kind of shake out? So, I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. It's up to you guys whether it works or not. I guess we'll just need to think through the sideboards of what's in and what's out should this move forward.
Mel?
Yeah, I follow the logic Dennis is talking about that. And it's an interesting idea, but once you and the devil's in the details, and there's a lot of details that I think would have to be worked through somehow, because once you kind of open that door, then it opens other doors, or it opens, questions for other people that are, losing income by participating in different ways. And I know, the council perspective, we our SSC folks are, receive like a stipend, and but that's created a lot of discussion at times from other groups and things too. So it's might be something you want to look into, but it would require a lot of analysis of, different details. And it's a much bigger, group of folks than say, like, some of the stuff we deal with at council level. But I do follow the logic behind it.
Go ahead, Roy.
I have some opinions on this particular topic, and I'll just quickly share a personal opinion. I just speaking for myself, and Dennis and I have not had an opportunity to discuss this lately, at least. I could see considering remuneration for attendance at a special council meeting like Ray is volunteered for, simply because the council members are paid to attend those meetings. We are not paid to attend those meetings, obviously. LGAs are volunteers. In terms of average or even non-average meetings and phone calls and things of that nature that are part of our normal Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission operating procedures, I can't see at this point in time additional remuneration for LGAs. So I would separate it thusly. If it's outside with the councils where those people are paid to attend those meetings, then that would be something to consider. If it's internal, strictly within ASMSC, I don't think we're there yet. That's my personal opinion.
I've got a few hands, and Richie, I'll happy to recognize you. I think I'm not sure of the order now, but I'm going to go to Dan next, and then.
I know back home we have a Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission which oversees my rulemaking, and it states clearly that these are unpaid positions. I don't know what it says about filling these positions. I just wonder if some of this might fall back on the states. If the governor's appointee, should a governor be because, like, for example, Ray is considered a special state employee because of his appointment on our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission. I don't know if he's considered a special state employee by virtue of this appointment. So I wonder if the executive branch back home ought to be sending some funds for with this appointment. As Dennis said, it's not much, but it would maybe enhance the ability to attract, retain, folks. Because, if you look at who are the successful members of this, it's typically those who have an income related to fisheries. And so, that's, and I wouldn't want to penalize somebody who didn't have a fisheries related income who still wanted to participate. So I'm gonna go home and ask those questions and see if there's some option there.
Yeah, Jim, to that point, go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman. I was thinking the same thing, that Dan thought, but then, maybe a simple way as an administrator, it's like, all right, fine, let's pay some people more money. Where's the money going to come from? And the easiest solution, or at least a straightforward solution, we all pay dues. And if we essentially then, in each one of the states was willing to do that, that might be a way to get at it. But on the flip side, then we may have to reopen the charter. I mean, because that's essentially, that was, so that whole thing may be the biggest lift of all, even though maybe the easiest solution. And again, is a lot of this in the details. I mean, if it was going to be, you're a commissioner, you fly out, whatever, you get 1,000, whatever the number is, fine, but whatever. But then it starts expanding, and that's the thing we really have to be careful about. So if we came up with a number, it's going to cost you $10,000 a year, and then 5 years from now it's going to be $200,000, then it's going to be really a problem. Anyway, thanks.
Richie, do you want to, and then we'll go to Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been waiting 22 years to speak from the public microphone. I agree with Roy, having sat in that seat, that I can remember thinking about looking around the table and everybody there is making $500 a day. I volunteered to do it. I was happy to do it. And the money, was not an issue, but I certainly was aware of that. And I was representing the commission. So I think that's far different when you're pulling a commissioner to go to a council meeting to represent the commission, is different than a commissioner serving on a committee or something internal to the commission. So I think it would be easy to describe that type of situation. And I think that I would think it would be easy to not allow it to morph into, to become a huge program. So I agree with Dennis's. I didn't know he was going to do this. I think it's a good thing to put in, and I think it helps to allow a wide variety of commissioners to be able to do it, or to think, geez, I think I'll take this on. Because there is some effort involved. You're looking at what's the proposal before you get to the meeting. So there's reading, there's talking to some other people, and then it's attending the meeting. So I think it would be a great thing for the commission to do. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for waiting, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in it. I wonder, so we have this, there's kind of like two versions of this. I think what Dennis kind of originally proposed is sort of a special circumstance kind of situation. I agree with folks who said it could get kind of complicated quickly. So I think that's why it's important to sort of have someone sit down and kind of think through what those special circumstances are. Maybe a second model can be developed that's simpler, where it's just, maybe it even bounds the issue. What if there was just a stipend for like the non-administrative folks? And I think the important part is, when we're talking about this, there's a fiscal impact. And so we can understand it better. We can make some assumptions about, how many of these special meetings there might be, or in the simple version, like what's the kind of extreme version of this? What's the fiscal impact? And then getting back to it, like what Jim said, then we can think about, well, how much would that increase the state's dues, or, does that cut into research money for the commission, or, the kind of accounting part of it. And so I think that will allow us to have a really thoughtful discussion on it if we can kind of understand it in those really like logistical terms, but I'm interested in seeing that, I guess is my main point.
Thanks, Jay. Justin?
Thanks, Joe. I'll chime in and thank Dennis for bringing this forward. I think it's something absolutely worthwhile that we should look into. I think in Connecticut, when we're trying to find council members for New England Council, we have such a hard time, and it's because we're asking people to make a substantial commitment of their time. And in that instance, there is a stipend involved. So, to look at around the table at our LGAs, they make a substantial contribution to our process. They're, really important. I think we owe it to them to take a look at this. And as, Jay was saying, I think it's just a matter of putting some different approaches and options together to look at. Certainly that's something we're really good at, is creating documents with a bunch of options in them. I mean, if you look at the Menhaden meeting we're going to have this afternoon. So I think we can do that, and I think we should absolutely look into it.
Yeah, as far as next steps go, I guess, Laura and I can pull something together based on attendance and meetings and that sort of thing. I guess, there's different ideas kind of moving around on which meetings would qualify and which wouldn't. So I think we're going to have to come up with some different scenarios on, do the joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council count. The whole board goes there and meets jointly with them. Is that, still a burden on the LGAs? And then you get into, I think the councils have some formulas on, full day, partial days, all these other details that go along with it. So we can look into some of the council stipend processes and how they work and bring something back at the February meeting if that's what this group wants.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me be clear. We're not talking about, or do not want to talk about joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council. We're talking about special meetings. And again, drawing an analogy, you all are state employees and you have a salary. But I'm sure that when you extend yourself in hours, coming to meetings and it runs 12, 16 hours, whatever, that on the other end, you're getting comp time or overtime, probably comp time, whatever. The amount of money we're talking about, Tony, I can't speak to you, but whatever. But I'm willing to bet that what I'm proposing, probably the breakfast that we had in the back of the room this morning, I bet if Laura told us how much the commission is being charged, is probably equivalent to the amount of money that I'm talking about for this special purpose. Not getting too broad. And again, understanding, taking my state, if I would have volunteered, not volunteered, but been put on the hearing board at the council, whatever you want to call it, proxying for Senator Waters, it's possible that I could accept somehow remuneration. But if Senator Waters was sitting here as a state senator, I don't think that he would be able to accept the money, or any elected official would probably be able to, accept payment. But again, in particular, the legislators, legislative proxies like myself, we're volunteers, complete volunteers, and we're not getting paid by anyone. Sometimes governor's appointees are paid by organizations. I've seen that in the past, and even that wouldn't affect them as being eligible to receive some funding. But let's not make too big of a thing of this. Get through the details. And again, as a closing remark, there's murmurings amongst the LGAs about compensation. There are LGAs that feel that they should be compensated for spending their time here. So I won't say it's going to be broader at any point in time, but again, from where we were some years ago, the commission is in a much different place with participation than it was a long time ago. a long time ago. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's calm time, I'm off next year, 2023, I'll be off. I think everybody else will be too. It's what Dennis just finished with is what I was going to talk about. It's the murmurings that I'm hearing about compensation, right? My governor's appointee from Maine and others around this table who fish for a living lose days on the water, right? So I do think there is a bit of a slippery slope here, and and I'm not saying that to take away from what Dennis is bringing up, because there is a cost associated with it. I just think we're going to need a lot of information in order to make a really informed decision here. And what I hadn't thought of it until Jim brought it up earlier in his comment, but is there a charter issue here that needs to also be looked at?
Yeah, all of our guiding documents at the commission, the charter and the compact and everything else is silent on payment. It's not in there. The one part of it potentially would be the due structure is spelled out. And, if we go along this process and there is additional assessments that go to the states, then that part would have to be updated. But, and we'd have to memorialize the whole thing somewhere, the process on it. But we don't have to change it in the sense of, getting rid of something that says are unpaid positions or anything like that.
Jim?
Just a clarification from Dennis. So my thought on this was that, if we went down this road, say hypothetically, I'll just pick a number, $1,000. So a proxy or LGA gets $1,000 a year as a stipend. However, the example used with Ray, would that be then you get $1,000 stipend, but then every additional group, the thing you go on, you get additional, or would just be a flat fee? Because I think the flat fee thing is probably going to keep it a lot simpler and maybe less messy.
Could I answer? Yeah, I would think it would be on a per meeting basis, not setting aside $1,000 or whatever. But if there was 2 meetings that year, if we decided we're paying that person 1/2 of what a council member was getting, $250, that's what it would be.
Thanks, Roy.
I like the idea of Bob and Laura giving this some consideration and putting some of these ideas down on paper, perhaps, so we can mull them over. I just want to emphasize, having been involved in the commission process for a very long time, that commission involvement and my time associated with commission duties has evolved over the years. And it's becoming more complicated every year, particularly as we have these joint meetings with the Mid-Atlantic Council. So it's more time every year. And people have said to me, you volunteer your time for all that? Are you of right mind to do that? And sometimes I wonder myself. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's not the same as it used to be. It's continually evolving. It's getting more complicated and more time demands all the time. And so I think the time is right to give this some consideration. Thank you.
I just remind the folks about donating your time. Some of you may or may not know, I've mentioned this to various people over the years. When I was a legislator, I was paid handsomely to be a member here. But New Hampshire state legislators paid $100 a year. And it was paid in one lump sum of $200 at the beginning of the session, of which they took $29 in income tax and FICA. And that was for spending probably an average of 80 to 100 days a year being a state legislator. Is that stupid?
Yeah, but bread was a nickel back then, Dennis.
All right, I mean, I think we've had a pretty full discussion on this, and it'll come back to us. I think this is probably one we'll see on an agenda item where we're all doing the Brady Bunch online thing, but but Bob and Laurel have some more information on this for us. And I think that's it, right?
The rise letter.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Bob. Okay, so we do have one more thing, and Bob sent out an email, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as soon as I start talking, you guys will realize that I missed Deke a whole lot and wish she was doing this instead of me. One of the congressional office from Rhode Island called me and asked about the commission's support for the RISE Act. I don't, there's a lot of different ways to pronounce it. RISEE. I'll call it the RISE Act. I don't know if that's what it really is, but this executive committee had reviewed a letter a few months ago, and there's generally, in general support. There were a couple details about state eligibility and the amount of minimums that would go to states and those sorts of things. And just as background, I sent the email yesterday. There's a few documents in there, and one of them is sort of a schematic of how the money is going to flow. And just so everyone's on the same page, this is the Reinvesting in Shoreline Economies and Ecosystem Act. So it is essentially money generated through offshore wind power, wind energy development would be part of that. Part of those funds would be moved to the states. And the way it would work is for lease payments and other payments associated with wind power, 50% of that money would go into the U.S. Treasury, 37.5% would go to the coastal states, and then the remaining 12.5% would go to National Oceans and Coastal Security Fund. And within that fund, the amount, if up to 34 million, goes to competitive grants, and anything above the 34 million would go to 75% through state formula. And it's a pretty complicated process. And one of the other attachments that I sent out in yesterday's email was sort of a hypothetical distribution of money. If there's $500 million available, how that money would flow through, flow out to all the states over a 10-year period. So the reason the congressional office called is they feel there's, as reasonable a chance as anything, a bit of a reasonable chance that this act could actually get passed in the lame duck session now that the election is over or pretty close to being over. So, that's why they were really hoping to get a letter of support from ASMFC on this issue. And, that would show that all the 15 East Coast states are behind it and felt that would help them move this along quite a bit. In the letter that's drafted, there's a number of governors at the state level that have supported this already. And so, the question is, Bill Hyatt worked on the letter a bit and can fill in more details if you'd like, but we did modify the letter a little bit, and it does say, it does explore the idea of a reasonable minimum be provided to each of the states. So, the question is, I can go into more detail if you'd like, but, the question is this group comfortable forwarding that draft letter to the policy board, have the policy board agree to sign that letter off to the leadership in Congress and see if we can get this bill moving along. So, while I'm speaking, the other thing that Bill and I and others are still working on is RAWA, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and we hope to push that through in the lame duck session as well. There's a fair amount of momentum there, but, it's a big spending bill as well. So, happy to answer questions on the RISE letter and details of the RISE Act if you'd like. But the question is, is the letter in good shape to go to the policy board?
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I was one of the people who brought up some issues around some of the formulas. And I think having gone back, we had a lot of conversations internal to the state, including our energy office. And Bob, I think the change. I think the letter was tweaked a little bit. If I am recognizing that, I think that small change certainly satisfies any concerns that I raised earlier. So I would recommend we forward it to the policy board.
Other comments? Go ahead, Jay, and then Jim.
Yep, I also support it. I was sort of wondering, reading the letter, like about some of those details, because just like everything, it can get kind of squishy quickly. But at the highest level, this came up at the state directors meeting in San Diego. I think it was the director from Oregon kind of talked about, this, and we need to do all this new work, right? And there's no new funding source. Well, this could be a solution to that. So I support it, moving to the policy board as well.
Yeah, likewise, I definitely support it. And my governor had written a letter supporting this already, so I just sent it to our legislative folks just to look at it. And they were just for consistency, and they were fine with it, other than just the sentence under the, I think, third to last paragraph confused them. So there might be a little tweaking because they didn't understand the last sentence about the 75-mile geographic. There's a typo in there, and there were some other confusing parts of it. So, but I can get you more detail on that if you need it. But you definitely support sending the letter.
Yeah, one additional comment. The hope of getting this approved sooner rather than later is that there's a number of pretty big leases that are kind of come up as part of the auction process. So if we're able to get the RISE Act approved soon, some of the revenue from those new leases would then be distributed through this formula. So the hope is to get it in place quickly so we don't miss out on some of the revenue out of these additional leases that are out there. And a couple of them are, two on the West Coast, I think one in the Gulf, and maybe another one here on the East Coast. So there's some really big projects and big chunks of revenue potentially coming online.
Great. Looks like we have consent to move this forward then, and that's it. We can adjourn and business session at 10:15.